Well, hello and welcome to Energetic Media. It's a very exciting episode. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I think it's going to be hard to ever top this one because in my entire investing career, it's rare that I find a stock that checks all the boxes and doesn't just look like it potentially is a 10-bagger. It looks like it's a layup 10-bagger that has a shot at being, 100 or beyond X return. Like it seems crazy. I don't want to sound too promotional, but when you go through the numbers of this company, that's what I'm left with. I mean, I'm left with this burning desire to own more and questioning why I don't, own even more than I already do. The stock, Hydrograph, ticker HG, and the CEO, Kjirstin Breure. Great pleasure. Welcome. So welcome. It's great to have you. So you want to just tell us a little bit about your background, education, and some of the experience you've had over the years?
Sure. So I have a master's in material science and engineering. Previous to Hydrograph, I was working for different tech startups, and one of them was in semiconductor manufacturing, and we were looking at graphene as a heat sink or a thermal transfer application. And I was very lucky to have that CEO introduce me to the founder, Harold Davidson, of Hydrograph, which was then called Carbon 2D. So I was the first employee in Hydrograph. I joined at the beginning of 2020. Really, there was not an operating company at that time, so I joined as COO and have been really pleased to have the ability to build out the team, eventually move to president in the beginning of 2022, and then just last year in March of 24 moved to CEO.
Okay. And so how many employees have you got with Hydrograph now? I understand you have a solid technical team that you've kept, including the Sorensen, who originally made the discovery of the patents for the technology.
Mm-hmm. Roughly 20. So we do have a team of application scientists in the UK. There's an innovation hub called the GEEC, the Graphene Engineering Innovation Center. Most of our operations are in the US. So the team, as you mentioned, Dr. Sorensen, Stephen Coracle, he's designed and built all of our reactors. They're in Manhattan, Kansas, the other Manhattan. And we are now moving that team to Texas as there's abundant engineering talent and also very close access to our primary feedstock, acetylene.
So graphene, I don't think I've ever seen anything as far as, like, I've been a commodity investor for 30 years. And I'm actually a big fan of Jim Rogers, who was pointed out to me that he, back in 2013, described graphene as the most important one of the most important things in the world as far as materials and commodities go. He said he equated it to be as important as electricity or even discovering the internet. And, as I look through all the different areas that graphene is going to touch, every household item, it seems, over time, industrial, commercial applications, building materials, I'm just blown away at how much better and all the different ways it makes things. So maybe just give everyone an overview of how you see the graphene market and how important it is, and sort of, give people an idea of what is the graphene market and why should we be so excited about it, and why is it going to be a household name for everybody?
Sure. I sometimes liken it to silicon, just in how that has really advanced computing and more. But honestly, a more apt example is maybe even oil, because it really will touch everything. And if we think about graphene, most of the materials that we've used, they're more specific to one use. You're not going to use silicon for most applications. But with graphene being carbon, of course, most of the natural world is created of carbon. It's extremely versatile. And so when we think about graphene, it's just, of course, one atomic layer of carbon atoms. You can think of graphite as billions and billions of layers stacked, and that's quite why your pencil slides across a piece of paper. Once you isolate that one sheet or a few sheets, it has completely different properties. So again, we have all of these shocking statements, harder than a diamond, more conductive than copper, stronger than steel. And just a very, very small amount, often less than 1%, can fundamentally alter material properties. So when we think about the future, what we're working on right now, we can put it in concrete, plastics, carbon fiber, you name it. But the future will have technologies that we can't even fathom at this point. And that is what I find the most exciting about graphene. It's really unlocking so much more in how we see material interactions and what's going to be possible.
So it makes things stronger.
Mm-hmm.
It makes things last longer, less
Mm-hmm.
friction. You know, we've got the UV properties, and when you say it's a better conductor, there's less resistance, so less energy. And really, it's like a green material in a way, because it makes everything, you know, either lighter, which means less fuel, or it makes it more efficient with less friction, or last longer, which means longer replacement cycle. So in every single case, it's sort of, it's saving energy by adding it to products.
That's correct. Kind of at high level, you can say it makes things lighter, faster, stronger. So you can really put graphene in anything. You can use it in internally as a drug delivery system. You can put it actually in fuel to make the fuel more efficient and last longer. You can put it in almost anything that you can imagine. Graphene can positively improve. So when we think about, you know, industries, and even if you're going to be calculating the TAM, it's almost impossible to calculate, just because the breadth of what you can look at is just overwhelming.
Well, and one of the things I've written about in my recent book, I talk about the core of my investment philosophy has always been what I call the intrinsic energy principle of investing, where I like to get involved in companies where I see this company is either going to, you know, the energy you put into making something results in more energy, you know, it's net energy positive, it's a return on the energy invested, or this, when you invest and you put this technology or this company saves energy so that it's economic to do so in the process. And when I start going through and I look at, like, you know, you put graphene in car tires and they last an extra 10,000 to 15,000 miles is some of the stats I've heard. And they get better traction. So you got longer life, better traction, and more fuel efficiency for the vehicle. You start going, wow, there's a quick ROI payback. And it makes sense to put this in, you know, you're going to get paid to put it in. Even though you spend more on the development, there's a quick payback for doing so. And it's like that, it seems like it's like that in a lot of different products, despite, as we're going to get into, the very high prices you can charge for some of the high-end graphene.
Mm-hmm. No, you're completely right. And I think especially with Hydrograph specifically, you know, when you look at industries in the past, you know, overall, you mostly see a trend that we use more and more energy to create newer and more advanced materials. Most industrial processes use a huge amount of energy. And then with this discovery, what I love about it specifically is, you know, we have this exothermic reaction, meaning, you know, it's giving energy. We don't need really any energy to initiate that, because if you think about acetylene, which you know is a welding gas, it's very volatile, it's bringing a lot of energy. Once we initiate that reaction, you know, it's a very, very low energy process, and then our waste is syngas, which is not really a waste product, it's a commodity gas, and we'd have an offtake agreement for it. So just the production process is not only incredibly efficient, but incredibly cost effective. And to your point, once you integrate graphene into different products, you have these massive benefits. And what we find with nanomaterials is, you know, usually with legacy materials, when you're changing something, you also have a decrease somewhere else. You know, if you're making something stronger, it might be more brittle. With nanomaterials, you can kind of layer on these benefits. So not only do you get that longevity, but you can kind of tune it to how you would like it to behave.
It's absolutely amazing and fascinating. One of the things I was looking at was the you know, the market as a whole, and tried to say, you know, a lot of the pushback is what I asked. I asked some people on Twitter that follow me, you know, who knows about graphene? You know, curious, any of my followers, because as I was buying, you know, I like to sort of see what other people are saying, so I don't feel like I'm crazy, because as I've mentioned, I bought a lot of shares, and you know, you see the common, you know, Jim Rogers talked about it in 2013. So I got feedback from, you know, some of the smart early investors, especially the commodity guys out of Toronto that I know. You know, oh, I looked at that 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and I put some money in, and it hasn't worked out. It was too early. Even people who looked at it just in the last couple of years are thinking like, well, you know, there's not this big profit to contracts, but it seems like there's so many companies out there now finally doing the work. And you've talked about having a pipeline between like 65 and 70 companies, some really major companies coming through. And I don't know what, like, I've tried to see who's in the geek that we're going to talk about. What can you say about the like why it's now. Everyone's waiting for contracts, and then the stock will take off, and that's what we're trying to see is when will these contracts come through, and how long does it take for these companies to, make the decision.
So I think there's a few levels there. I think for one, the industry has absolutely been held back by very low quality graphene that's also been too expensive. And I've touched on this in a few other presentations, which is also on our presentation deck, which you can find online. But there was a journal, Advanced Materials, that published an article in 2017 that was doing an analysis on 60 companies claiming to produce graphene, and they found that less than 50% had actual graphene content, with a majority having less than 10%, really meaning most of these companies are selling graphite powder. And when you think about graphene, the ISO defines graphene again as less than 10 layers. It takes an enormous amount of energy and or chemicals to really get to that point. And often companies are, it's difficult for one, I think, to have a process that's consistent. So what we hear from customers is batch to batch. There's really no consistency between samples. And when you're thinking about commercializing a product, it's obviously very difficult to commercialize something, again, when there's no consistency. So a lot of these companies that had early sales, these are now starting to close. And I think that there's going to be, I'm sure there's going to be a huge amount of consolidation within the industry. We've seen a number of large graphene companies go under, and I think that trend is only going to continue. Very likely there's going to be less than 5 of us remaining, and I think that this is a healthy stage for us to go through. I think we've gone through the peak of the hype cycle, let's say between 2014 to 2016, and this is just a natural course. And so with Hydrograph specifically, as mentioned, I've been CEO since March of 24, and because these are 18-month development cycles, we are just now approaching that contract negotiation phase. So the next, let's say, 6 months to 12 months, it's going to be an extremely exciting time for the company.
There was 65 companies out, and from what you've said before in previous interviews, your product, your graphene performs, as well or better than any other of the competitors at the Geek in Manchester. And so, I have to just wonder, what people are going to try to imagine, what percent of those 65 companies do you think you'll end up getting a contract with? And, have you given any guidance, or what is your instinct, or what is your feeling on the percent of wins that you will get out of the companies testing your materials today?
You're never going to land everything for a multitude of reasons, but I think that with us, it's such a clear, we are using between 10 to 100 times less of our graphene because it is so much more powerful than anything else available on the market. So while, again, every company is going to have their own goals and their own thought process, they might decide that they're not going to seek sustainability or they don't want to change their process. That's completely, their decision. But overwhelmingly, again, we find a huge amount of interest, and I would say most of the movement is within defense and any industry that's prizing performance over anything. Graphene is a natural solution because, again, you can kind of layer on these benefits. So I do believe that we will land a majority of them, and again, our pipeline is really growing basically by the week at this point. So I think that you had actually posted on x.com some of the volumes that could be associated with defense. If we only would focus on that sector alone, forget about the 65 customers, because the defense contracts are not even included in what we would consider our normal pipeline, just because we need more clarity on that before adding that to our sales force. That alone, we would be a massive company if that would be the only thing that we'd be landing.
And maybe just to touch on so people understand, I see Nano Explore. They bought a company out of the U.S. It produces a graphene that goes into everything from, hockey sticks, example, high-end hockey sticks that fellow Canadians know how expensive those are, $400 Canadian, $300 a stick. And then we see in the playoffs, so every now and then one snaps in half when there's a slap shot or whatever. And so you think about quality and consistency. And that's a lower end graphene product that goes into it. It's a much cheaper product. do you see yourself moving towards that type of market at all? Like would you just put a little bit of your graphene into a hockey stick? You could enter that market and compete with them, or would you just say there's no point even bothering with that? And just like we see the odd stick break, obviously when you're dealing with military applications, if you're putting coatings or using materials on a you know, $500 million fighter jet or whatever, you obviously the quality is what matters, and consistency, right? So
Completely. We don't say no to opportunities, but I think that, for us, well, that application's not specifically in our pipeline because we are often upstream. It could be that the customers that we have, they will inevitably sell to, sports equipment companies and the like. So it could be, again, because, we're kind of in this basic material that it could be used in a huge assortment. And again, I would say, we're very different from a company like NanoExplore, but all graphene companies growing and building the industry and providing confidence in nanomaterials in general is good for all of us. So I don't necessarily see other graphene companies as competition.
and their process is quite different. I'm a shareholder of NanoExplore, by the way. Not as large a shareholder as I am of Hydrograph, but I did buy some because I just look at, like, there's sort of I look at it like three main market components, right? Or three main markets. There's the lower end bulk sales for, products that you want to make great, but it's okay if you break a stick every now and then. And then you've got this high-end market where it's really about consistency and you can't take the risk on quality for safety reasons because people's lives are at stake, or you're just trying to make a very high-end product. And then there's this other market where you're potentially growing graphene on computer chips for quantum computing. And so you're saying your sweet spot is this high-end sort of, especially with the defense sector, is one of the ones you want to focus most on.
Yes, absolutely. I think the high-end market is really well suited. Again, anything that's prizing performance over everything, defense is a great example of that. Anything that would be for energy storage, electronics, you really need very, very pure graphene. But when we're an extremely large company, I mean, we can target concrete, we can target rubber. We won't care at that point because, I think having the economy of scale there, it really enables us to pursue everything. But right now, we are obviously very focused on near-term revenue generation, and we want to maintain our margins, and we want to move quickly.
So we've touched on purity. So you're 99.8 certified, which there's only a couple of companies. Like, how many companies in the world have been certified at that quality level?
So I would say I think we need more standards within the graphene industry. We are a verified graphene producer by the Graphene Council, so they came to our facility in Manhattan, Kansas. They did an extensive audit of our production process. They sent our samples to independent labs like NPL, which is a well-known lab in the UK. And we got the characterization report, which is basically saying, and I do kind of want to make a note of this, that what we say that we make is what we make. But that does not mean everything for graphene. And just to say a little bit more about this, no two graphenes are really the same. Every company is going to have a slightly different production process. They might use different solvents. Of course, we don't use solvents. We are the only explosion synthesis process. But it's not only about purity. I think only talking about the carbon content, graphite has a high carbon content and does not function like graphene. So I always want to make a point to say it's also about the crystallinity. True graphene is 100% crystalline. And that is, for example, the difference between graphene and soot, which would not perform, of course, as graphene would. And it's also sp2 bonding. And so, for example, a diamond structures sp3 bonding, so would carbon black or acetylene black. Those materials do not have the same properties as graphene. So I always want to make a point to say people need to look not only for purity in terms of carbon content, but crystallinity and sp2 bonding, and most companies do not disclose that. To my knowledge, we are the only company that has an exceptionally high purity, a very high, 100% crystallinity and 100% sp2 bonding.
And so maybe I'll try to put this in so commodity and mining investors understand. So a lot of people, that was another thing that first came up when I asked people about graphene. People started talking about graphite. And I'm like, well, graphite and graphene seem to be very different things. And you can mine graphite and then go through the process of trying to make graphite into a graphene. But what you're saying is that really doesn't give you the same quality of graphene at the end of the day. Are you able to even really call it graphene if it's not, doesn't have that crystalline ability? Because I guess what I'm sort of imagining is this idea of the crystalline nature of it, or the molecular structure is such that when your product, when you mix it into a polymer, you're making a plastic with it, it just naturally bonds and it forms that lattice that gives it everything the strength, and you won't get that if you don't have those properties.
Mm-hmm. That's true, and I understand this is a very technically dense discussion, so I think it's helpful, if people could imagine something being created, let's use polymer chemistry as an example. If you could kind of zoom in so you can see the bonding and you can see the atomic structure, what you would not want to have would be these, what I think is often in the market, is these large chunks of graphite. What you want are these tiny, tiny little particles, because it basically enables atomic precision. So for us, we are the most nanoscale graphene in the market. Our lateral particle size is between 20 and 50 nanometers, and we have a very, very high surface area. So that means that you can take a very, very small amount of what we have, and these tiny little particles, well dispersed, they accelerate that bonding. So overwhelmingly, it happens faster and it happens in an even scale, where you don't want to have, these chunks that are giving you gaps. This part is not bonding well, it's inconsistent. And so when you use something like our graphene, you have that perfect structure being created much faster, and again, in a much more consistent way. So the overall strength of that component is going to be incredibly different. I hope that makes sense, because I feel like it's
It makes perfect sense. I hope it makes sense to the viewers, but for me, it makes perfect sense. The product itself, so we talked about the purity. I've seen some people commenting about, can you get to 4 nines or 5 nines, and what's the value in that? Is that something that you're looking, is that when you want to go to the very highest end quality, and is that a process that you can work with, or do you?
Yes.
Maybe just touch on that.
I would say we're, I think, probably one of the very few companies that have a one-step process. So in that one step, we do produce 99.8% graphene. We can always increase that percentage if we need to. But I do want to make a point that, previously, everyone was talking to the point that I just made on how, nucleation happens. Everyone was talking about large flake size. Most of the industry thought that large flakes worked better, for example, for polymer chemistry, for concrete, whatever it would be, for mechanical benefits. We completely upended that thought process. We proved with abundant data that the smaller lateral particle size is going to be superior. And again, we believe that's because we're increasing the nucleation sites. So I always want to caution, I think, because this is a new area and because this is a new material, we are consistently learning what is working in practice and what we might suspect. And so I think, to go back to, carbon content or purity, our highest grade graphene is actually with additional oxygen added, because oxygen is adding 2 electrons. So this is actually more giving that addition to conductivity for surface area. So that is our most expensive graphene. That's, about $800,000 per ton. So I think that while there are certainly places where you need 99.99, I'm a little bit cautious to say things definitively, because part of me wants to say we just don't know. Sometimes things work that are a little bit outside of what we might expect, and we see this in the lab all the time.
Okay, so as an investor, over the years, one of the first things I always ask companies is about their patents, and from what I've seen, and I'm looking at these, we'll go through a few of the different patents you have, and you keep adding them. Patents are everything. They protect. It's what allows you to protect margins and prevents you from being considered to be a commodity or just a materials company. And I view your company as basically an innovative tech company with this pipeline for massive growth, which not just means higher market multiple, like higher PE as the earnings come through, but just the potential to really do amazing things. And when I look through the patent portfolio, it really excited me, because it's more than just, so you got the original patent, which is the fractal graphene patent that was filed, I guess, back 2014 or something, and then Did it get actually put into place in 2016 and it lasts 20 years from that date or from the earlier date?
From 2016. So it was discovered in 2014. The patent was granted in 2016 out of
Okay,
Kansas State University.
so you got till 2036 of using, your technique, this exploding gases, as the market leader, which is
Yes,
massive.
but we do have additional patents that are granted that continue to broaden that moat. So that is not the only patent that is protecting us. We have had one that was granted in 2022, and that is basically in addition to our process. And this year alone, we have applied, I want to say, for more than 10. Dr. Sorensen, who invented the process, is prolific.
Yeah, it's amazing. I actually would like to do a follow-up interview with him at some point if I could. And it'll obviously be very technical, but I'm really curious, and I want to talk more about these patents. So you've got one that was I don't know if it was finalized or just applied for, but this graphene ink, conductive graphene ink, and that's like printing on circuit boards. Is that what that's sort of for?
Exactly. So we do have various formulas. That one does give us a pretty broad coverage, and we've had a huge amount of interest in these application areas, I would say, from a pretty wide variety of customers.
And so you're developing these on your own or in partnership with some companies?
That was developed out of Kansas State University. Everything that we've applied, I would say, for the past 2 years has been completely independent. And we have a number of patents that are in process, which I can't really speak to today, but we will be disclosing quite soon.
Okay. And then so you've got this other one about the process synthesis of syngas components that was filed in 2021. And this sort of deals with the aftermarket sales, to go from your inputs of ether and oxygen, or ethylene, sorry. Is it ether or ethylene? Ethylene?
We use acetylene.
Acetylene, sorry.
I would say we have all hydrocarbons covered in that primary detonation synthesis patent. Our favorite is acetylene, but we do have all hydrocarbons covered. One of the patents that we have, I would caution, it's a low TRL level. It is using methane and oxygen in a kind of engine to produce hydrogen via syngas, and I think that's the one that you're referring to.
Oh, okay. And then you've got another one for 3D printing composite additive, which was 2022, which, this could be, is this for just like what we think of as manufacturing process, like making things out of 3D printing, like a plasticky kind of, but make it strong and with graphene, so it'll be stronger, less brittle? Because I've bought some things off the internet that have been 3D printed, and sometimes they break, right? The idea is adding graphene to that process, you're going to be able to produce something that's really strong, that's more like a molded product rather than a printed.
Exactly, and you often need slightly different properties when you're looking at 3D printing. Primarily, you need it to cure quickly. So, for example, other companies have quite a bit of data with concrete. We do as well. We've published a lot with Arizona State University, and we can significantly reduce the cure time, which basically enables concrete, for example, to be 3D printed.
Amazing. And the 3D printing of the concrete, so this it's beyond just the plastics. This patent relates to using your graphene in concrete production.
I gave an example on how 3D printing is a little bit different. This patent, the one that you're referring to out of Kansas State University, that one is just referring to polymer chemistry.
Okay. Just wanted to be clear. Okay, one other one that I had mentioned, that I have noted here was, I don't even really understand this one, but it says a hollow glass microspheres, graphene coated. What is that all about?
So I believe 3M pioneered this. This was invented by Ranjith Divigalpitya. He's our CSO. So in industry, when you're looking at composites, often these hollow glass microspheres, kind of like bubbles, glass bubbles, are put in small additions to basically lightweight, because a sphere does retain a huge amount of strength. It's very light, it's very cheap. So you add these mechanical benefits while significantly decreasing the amount of polymers that you're going to be using for the component. So we have a process for coating that with graphene, not only so it bonds better, but obviously a huge improvement to the strength, and we're testing this out now with various companies.
Okay, so give us just an example of like what could be a big product in that space.
For example, we could put it in a carbon fiber panel for an aerospace component and make it much lighter and much stronger.
It just amazes me as I go through this, just all the different products. So we talked a little bit about your process being clean and arguably emission-free, because you're just setting off an explosion with the acetylene and the oxygen, and then you have these off gases. And I played around with AI asking it what could be the credit back. You look at the gas cost, the input cost, and then it came up with anywhere from a half to a third of the gas cost could be offset with selling the byproducts. Is that overly optimistic, or is that reasonable?
I think that's pretty reasonable. I would say we have not calculated that in any of our models, just because for us it's kind of a bonus. Obviously, the value of graphene is very significant, but I think should we not arrange an offtake agreement for the syngas that we produce, we could easily just pump it into a generator and sell energy back to the grid. But we will absolutely be using that at scale.
Yeah, when I played around with AI asking about that, it was saying that the credit for electricity production would be about 10 to 15% versus if you were to able to get market pricing for the gas, it would be more like 2/3 of the cost would be reduced, so much more. It's worthwhile. But again, to your point, when you look at the price per ton that you're able to sell this product, the gas is rather irrelevant. I mean, I was coming up with numbers of around $4,000 or so in gas costs, and because you set up in Texas and where it's cheap and you don't have to have big transportation costs and such. Is that number reasonable, or is that off base?
Right. I mean, I can speak more to this. In Kansas, for example, we've often paid, $20 a kilo for acetylene, and that's because it's basically produced in Texas, put in these steel cylinders, put on a flatbed truck, and shipped over. So you can imagine not only the cost just in transporting the acetylene, but also there's a huge regulatory hurdle around using acetylene because it is so volatile. It's effectively a bomb hazard as soon as you separate it from the source. So for us locating in Texas and negotiating access to the pipeline, it's going to be probably at scale between $3 and $6 a kilo. So massive improvements. And again, the economic benefit is huge for us, but overwhelmingly we were looking for access.
Yeah, and safety, and it seems like a lot easier to be hooked into the grid with a pipe rather than having to bring all these cans in.
Yes.
Just the volume of them would be massive, right? In and out of a facility.
Completely. It's almost counterintuitive because we are rapidly increasing our access to acetylene, but it is going to be much, much safer just because there are so many mechanisms in place to prevent anything from going wrong. Obviously for our system, everything has sensors, so if any gas would leak out, the system shuts down, and there's a number of additional improvements that we'll see with the pipeline.
I've never seen yet the actual process underway, but how quickly do you fill and fire the chamber? Just as a side note, I'm just curious, and then how often do you open it up and get the powder out, or do you even have to open it up with your chambers? Is it just sort of a feed comes out the bottom?
Kind of. It is technically a batch process, but you can imagine it a bit like an engine. So the one that we have running in Manhattan, Kansas, we have 4 70-liter chambers. They fill and it kind of alternates between chambers, and then we flush it out with gases. Basically, once you have this explosion go off in the chamber, if you can imagine this puff of smoke crystallizing, it is then vacuum pulled into a hopper, and then it goes into collection. And again, at scale, we will have everything completely automated.
So, we've talked about, or I've seen in other videos, you talking about, a 10-ton unit and then, scaling up to a 25-ton unit, and we can get into the cost of that. But a 10-ton unit, is it actually a whole bunch of, like the way you're describing it now, it's almost like there's a whole bunch of small units rather than this one big explosion, you've got a whole bunch in a chain. Is that fair to say, or?
Yes, and I'm sure we've often said that we don't want to go bigger than what we have now because a 70-liter chamber is a energetic detonation, let's say. But every time we have, I guess, evolved our design, it has worked very effectively. So we can, well, we are looking at a new design for the Houston location, but again, we're very comfortable really with what we have.
No, I think that's actually, in my mind, I like to see cookie cutter, technology when I'm an investor, because there's less risk, right? And if I saw the original, I think it's I watched a video yesterday of I think it was the original Discovery chamber with just like a car spark plug.
Yeah.
In the side of it, and the chamber was only about this big. Is like this 70-liter chamber. Is it that size, or how?
Oh, 70 is pretty large. It's pretty wide. We do have a CAD rendition on our website. And to go back to the other point, for the Texas facility, it's not, I said redesign, but it's more just a reordering. For example, we're going to increase the amount of chambers that is still controlled by one control system, but there's no fundamental change to how anything is really working.
Yeah, that's what I think is beautiful about the idea of scale, because we want to be able to, as an investor, I want to see lack of risk in scale. So we know that it works totally fine and safe with a given size chamber, and whether it's a 10-ton unit or a 25-ton unit, you're really just saying I'm going to have the controller operating more chambers that are identical.
Exactly.
Right. And so the chambers themselves, who's making those? Has that been disclosed? Like, where do you order the it's like this thick steel. What is it made out of, the chambers?
Basically just carbon steel, very, very sturdy pieces of equipment. We expect the lifetime to be in excess of 10 years. We do not disclose our supply chain, but again, most of the components that we're purchasing are made in the US. I'm sure the entire supply chain could, of course, be more complex than that. But overwhelmingly, they're off-the-shelf parts, and then we have a number of proprietary components that we produce in-house.
Well, that seems for me to give great comfort to this idea around scaling risk. We talked a little bit about customization of the product, and this range between $100,000 a ton to $850,000 a ton. Could you just talk us through a little bit of what you're doing in order to get that price, and how confident are you that as far as you've upgraded or you've made this material custom and it's worth $850,000 a ton? How confident are you that you're going to be able to get that price? Because what's the value add to the company when they put that product in their whatever they're going to use it for?
That's a great question. So the lowest price we will ever sell for, at least in the foreseeable future, is $250,000 per ton. That is really our bottom price. Our highest price is, again, $800,000. We call it kind of an electronic grade. When we get to these, I would say, graphene derivatives or these more processed graphenes, we're often the only company that can produce them. So for example, with the one that I mentioned that has the highest price tag, I don't believe there is any company in the industry that can get anywhere close to what we have been able to accomplish there in terms of just looking at the data sheet. So I would say that because this is a newer addition for us, I would like to see more data on that. But what we are expecting is a very, very strong use case for most customers. And often, again, there's kind of this interaction with surface area and loading. So for example, if you have a very high surface area, you might be able to decrease the amount of loading. So all that being said, the amount of graphene that the customer would be using should be relatively small while we're providing a huge amount of value. So while I know our prices seem high, and I think that they are on the higher end in the industry, we have not had any pushback from customers.
So as far as product development goes, you're getting together with these companies, these 65 plus companies, and how often are you just handing them a sample that they then work with, and how much are you sort of integrating with them, and your lab technicians are working with them and saying, hey, let's play around, let's use a 0.5%, 1%, 2%, let's try to, change the characteristics of this graphene so that it suits the needs. How much are you sort of involved in that process with them?
That's a good question, and I would say it depends. We prefer to work very, very closely with customers. What we always avoid is just giving a powder, because if someone doesn't know how to process it and they make a mistake and then they think our graphene doesn't work, that's the last thing that we want. We really want to give as many instructions as we can and really work with the customer. Not every customer is open to that, so again, it kind of depends. And when they're more technically advanced, if it's a very large company and they have, abundant R&D resources, it does reduce that risk slightly for us. But again, there is a learning curve to working with graphene. So I would say likely more than 20 of the 70 we work with very, very closely. Sometimes they're not sharing as much, and I think, to use the Geek as an example, we don't have most of those opportunities listed in Salesforce, just because, and I think I've touched on this previously, there are certain confidentiality agreements that, for example, the Geek might have with customers. So we very likely have customers at the Geek that we have no knowledge of, because they've signed with the Geek just to keep things confidential. And then when the project completes, then we get introduced. So again, we're okay with that because the Geek has a huge amount of expertise in graphene. But again, there's a huge amount of variety there.
And have you? I just sort of wonder, you open yourself up. They've got competitors. You get in deep, and you work hard with a client trying to develop something. And you can sort of look at it like, well, you're happy to do that just to sell the product and get the contract. But you could also look at it like some companies maybe want to partner with you, or you could try to, as you gain leverage and expertise, you could say, we're going to come in and you could charge consulting fees, or you could say, we're going to co-develop a product with you, and we want to have a piece of the patent. Is that something that you could explore long term, or are you doing that at all with any companies at this point?
What do you mean by piece of the patent?
Well, it's like you say, let's co-develop a product together. And so it's like, the company says, I want to work with your team, your technical team, and we're going to develop this product. And there's going to be a patented process around using graphene with this product, and we want to co-develop the product with you so that you have like a royalty on the product instead of just selling the graphene.
Right. We have done that in a few cases. It really depends, again, on the working relationship. And again, just to reinforce, we do see revenue come in from engineering services. So the closer we work, or the more we're managing a project, we do always charge for that, as we always charge for samples. And so again, I think that when we're looking at not only our work with customers and with the Geek, we are very collaborative, and we also really enjoy working with other graphene companies, because often different graphene types can have a very beneficial synergy or interaction. And I think, again, the industry should not be competing with itself. I think we're more competing with legacy materials.
Okay, great. That's great to hear. I mean, I'm glad. It just made sense to me, like you should be getting paid for all this work you're doing with these companies, and it's great to hear that you are doing that. Although when you look at the numbers, minimum 250,000 a ton, and 10 tons, the numbers out there have been, I've seen people talk about a few 100,000, some say 350,000 for a 10-ton unit, and then I've seen anything from $500,000 to 650,000 for a 25-ton unit as far as Capex. What is that? Are those numbers sort of what we're looking at?
Not as high as 650. I'm not sure where that one came from. I think that there have been some outdated numbers on the lower end that are no longer relevant. So realistically, for the 10-ton, it's closer to 350,000. But as I mentioned, we will be moving to a 25-ton unit, and that is about $500,000.
Okay, yeah, I meant for the 25-ton unit.
The 25-ton.
Between the $500,000 and 650. I think it was just somebody trying to be conservative, probably.
That could be.
Yeah, I mean, either way, it doesn't really add up to much, because you put 10 years on, what are you depreciating this thing by over 10 years? It's nothing. No. Like, it's so little money, especially, I was watching Jay Taylor's interview yesterday, and, you're comparing it to the mining industry. that, you know, has hundreds of millions of dollars in Capex. And if you put even $50 million in Capex into building out these units, the cash flow and the payback is ridiculous, you know.
It's incredible.
Which is why, you know, I guess we're going to go there. I mean, why we, you know, I've looked at a lot of companies over 30 years. I've found several 10-baggers, and I've often, you know, thought things could be 10-baggers. This is the first time that I could say to people, that I've ever found myself saying to people, this company could be a 100-bagger, and maybe even that's conservative. I mean, you mentioned 3M the other day, or sorry, not the other day, early in this conversation, you mentioned 3M. You know, it's an $85 billion company, and I just think long term, this graphene industry is going to be so massive. And if you're in the development and the patent side of things, and producing different materials, and who knows how much vertical integration goes in with cash flow, I mean, it just might make sense to do more than just graphene, is what I'm sort of thinking is the long term, and the potential. You just don't know where these things go as a company grows and sees opportunity. When you have a group of experts, you know, on the leading edge, it's like, yeah, well, Google started with a search engine, and then they did all these other things. And I'm sitting there going, well, you got some really smart people on the edge of a massive industry. Anyway, I it's funny, in the Jay Taylor interview, they were talking about every time they talk about the stock, they feel like getting off, you know, buying more stock, and that's the way I feel. I'm sitting there asking myself, why aren't I at 10%? You know, the patents, the whatever, the margins, the scale, the profitability, and they came up, by the way, with 100x potential, and they were using like a 10 PE, right? And I'm like, that's like, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, you look at the margins of an AMD that trades with a 40 PE today. You know, and this technology, it's going into robotics, it's going into the latest in, you know, aircrafts and lubricants, and it's everything and everywhere. Anyway, sorry, I don't even, I get so excited, I get carried away, and I think there was a question in there, maybe?
I can probably touch on a few points. Well, for one, I do agree, and I think it's nice to now be able to socialize the story and have other people see it the same way. It almost feels like we've found oil and we're the only ones that have a drill. It feels like the potential here is truly unlimited. And to your point on, you know, we're starting with graphene, we have a very long list of experiments that we would like to do in-house, and I'm sure Chris would love to talk to you about this, but I'm going to caution him in advance to not give away our secrets, because he loves to discuss science.
So the financials, you know, obviously it's a chicken and egg thing right now. You know, I sort of look at, like, and I often talk about in my book about the co-vitality spiral for health, you know, where you do one good thing and it leads to other good things, and, you know, your business success leads to, you know, freedom, and the co-vitality for businesses like yourself, the spiral that I see, that I think that you're on the cusp of, is, you know, as you start looking like, and you're going to get these big contracts, even just one contract will bring in a whole list of new, you know, it's like the herd of investors, the people looking at your company, it becomes a game changer. And it's like, wow, they've got contracts. It's validation. That's what the average investor wants to see, is this validation of contracts. And some people like myself are sitting there going, the contracts should be coming. I mean, they outperform at the Geek. They've out with all these companies. They're going to get contracts, and there seems to be very little scaling risk. So why isn't the stock going up? You know, why isn't it going to be multiples? And obviously there's the funding concerns, right? Contracts, revenue, cash flow. When are we going to get out of this cycle of having to raise money and dilute shareholders, and God forbid, more warrants? Even though I like to get them, I hate to see them. I hate to see them out there. They're an impediment for buying a stock. And I just think if we can get the right shareholders, a combination of some real good, solid shareholders that are going to support funding as needed, and we're going to get to this point hopefully soon where there isn't even funding needed. And then the big contractors, they come in, the big contracts come in, big players, and it's like one thing just feeds on the other, and off you go. And so, you know, you've spoken a bit about the timeline that you've been out with these companies. You're expecting contracts, you know, to start flowing in. We've said we've got a majority. You think that the majority of the 65 companies, I think you said, would probably come through at some point or near it?
I do expect that to be the case. And again, with pre-revenue companies, it is always very, very difficult to predict the exact timeline. There's been a number of things I think we thought would happen faster, and with very large companies that you deal with, they can have a corporate reordering and it's just your project gets delayed. And we have had moments like that. And I think that, again, because these are 18-month development cycles, and I've only been CEO since March of 24, we are now entering this very, very critical inflection point. So I really wish I could say more here. We are very, very close. And I think that, to your point on capital, I mean, we will inevitably need more capital really to scale, especially to scale as quickly as I would like to. As you know, we'll be able to generate revenue in relatively short order. So that should be basically the end of it. But once we start announcing some of this news, those rounds should not be as dilutive. And again,
I mean,
we would also be looking at, we are actively looking at grant funding as well.
I mean, as far as news flow goes of contract wins, I mean, if you start imagining just straight line the pipeline of, 36 wins over the next 12 months, you're looking at 3 a month, and obviously they're going to be fits and starts, and we don't know when they're actually going to start coming through. But the excitement that's going to generate for me, and then the people that are sitting there worried about scaling risk, which I don't see as a risk, but even I've sort of said to people as I'm telling the story, I'm like, the contracts are going to come. And so at very least, the stock's probably going to be at $1, maybe $2. Who knows what, a bunch of big contracts, it could be a $3 stock before you've even actually scaled up the manufacturing side of things. So it's the kind of thing you can't really wait. And that's why I bought what I bought. I'm up to 12 million shares now. And I felt like this was a good time to get aggressive because I saw a bunch of warrants were going to be expiring in September. And yes, that could put weight on the stock, but I figure at this point in time, I mean, we're getting into mid-July, people are going to look at the liquidity that they had been looking at, not today's liquidity, and owners of those warrants are sitting going, am I going to write a check? Right? These warrants are in the money a little bit. So I imagine that if I got aggressive in the market, some people with warrants might sell stock in order to fund their warrant exercise that they know is coming due in September. And either way, I want to see that get tidied up, see those warrants disappear. And that will buy you some time. Mm-hmm. And so I guess my question is how confident are you that, I hope and I feel like I'd like to see some contracts or a contract prior to the next raise. The warrant money should flow in. Is that going to buy you enough time to hopefully get a contract or two so that you can then go to the market and say, look, we've got contracts, we've got cash flow, we're looking at debt, because you always have to sort of hold people off and say, look, we don't really need your money that much. I got other options here. And then you can demand, either half a warrant instead of a full warrant, or no warrant, or the warrant really high, or just, find a strategic investor. And so sort of where are you? What is your thinking on the timeline for capital raising?
Yes, always, I think, some nuance there. I think that, we do have, we're not exactly cash strapped right now. And as you mentioned, we do have that warrant tranche that's expiring at the end of April. And to your point, I really want to avoid warrants. I've never liked warrants.
September, right?
End of September. Those are priced at 18 cents, well in the money. I absolutely think that you had an effect on the market. I mean, again, thank you for your support. But going forward, it is my intention that we will not be using warrants from here on out. And again, very, very focused on clean terms. But we could be, with the right party, looking at some near-term round, and then in advance of NASDAQ, we would have a much larger raise. And that would, of course, be tied to commercial news. And again, because we would have the ability to really time that very well, because we are so close on a number of opportunities now, I do believe that this is going to come together. And again, I don't think that we're going to have as much dilution as I think people are maybe afraid of.
That's always the big concern. And I've actually, the one reason why I haven't gone to 25 million shares and, tried to buy close to 10% of the company is because I feel like, you're going to raise money at some point. So I sort of thought maybe I'll get a half a position and be sitting there waiting to go, do you need a check? Mm-hmm. Call me, right? Like when something's happening, I'm hoping I could, be in the circle, be restricted, and mm-hmm. potentially participate. Yeah, and hopefully on good terms. I mean, there's a culture out there in the finance world of trying to get a discount in these warrants and that. And I always think it's best if you just put your money in the company and you help get that company story out, and you just keep funding it. And every deal you do for the next while, I take down 5 or 10% depending on my holding, keep my pro rata share, and see that this company is moving to the point where it doesn't need raises anymore. And then it's just off to the races because everyone knows they can't get in otherwise. So you are looking at debt options as well for potentially to fund production growth. Have you looked at, or are you discussing with any potential purchasers, given the Capex being so low, like, do you think you could potentially get an order and have some of the, like a deposit that you could put towards funding the Capex on the product that's going to be delivered?
Yes, I do think that's possible. Again, we're quite open to different scenarios there, but I would also add, and I can't say too much about this at this point, we do feel a lot of interest from the U.S. government. So I do think more is going to be coming available to us.
And you mean grant or loan, or just a big order with a check?
Likely all of the above. There are quite a few programs that we are very well suited for. And what I can say at a high level, when you look at the current climate and the current administration, like them or dislike them, they move quickly. And so that is very much to our advantage. We are a foreign company wanting to fully redomicile to the U.S., onshoring U.S. manufacturing, and you could say critical mineral development that reduces our reliance on other critical minerals. So that is a huge strategic advantage for the U.S. government. And again, apart from contracts, apart from grant funding, I do think that additional support will be available to us.
Well, you've got U.S. patents, you have U.S. subsidiaries now. It seems like a no-brainer given the, what we're seeing politically to redomicile.
Yes.
I mean, it's unfortunate for Canadian taxpayers that you're not going to help us out down the road, but there'll be capital gains to be paid by shareholders like myself for the Canadian government down the road as well. So the process, you'll redomicile, we'll look at a NASDAQ listing. Obviously, you're going to want contracts before you're applying for NASDAQ. Would I expect that would be the case? It's going to be like, are you thinking next year, first quarter?
I would like to list by Q1. It's roughly, let's say, a 6-month process, a little bit longer when we fully redomicile, but we can do that in a phased approach. And yes, we will have abundant news flow and contracts.
And the redomiciling process, how long does that take, do you think?
I think there's a bit of nuance there. I don't think it's going to take us too long. I think it's a matter of, I want to say, 3 months. It's really just some accounting, some taxation changes, and just a lot of documentation.
Well, that's going to be really exciting because U.S. investors, especially being on NASDAQ, and with the patent portfolio, I mean, I just think that needs to be front and center on your website and be talking about your company as much as possible. I know you are with me, but the message still isn't out there. I mean, when I talk about graphene, the instinct is, oh, I've got this graphene mine, and people are thinking it like a commodity, and people are talking about PEs of 10. And I'm like, no, this is a huge growth industry. Speaking about timelines, I wrote up, with my son, we wrote up an article on neodymium, or rare earths, just a few weeks ago. And MP Minerals, we saw what happened to that stock as it got an announcement of big support from the U.S. government. And that's one of the reasons why I've gotten aggressive with Hydrograph buying shares now. It's because I'm concerned trying to wait around for maybe some sloppy trading by shareholders that are flipping stock and executing warrants. I just felt like I have to jump in front of this potential move. And you're obviously able to say that, like, it sounds like you're saying, and I just want to be careful I don't get you offside with anything, but you could say that you're in talks with the government, or how are you phrasing this so that we're correct?
Yeah, it's tricky because I can't say too much, but, we're not under any confidentiality agreement, for example. They have been quite clear in their interest in Hydrograph, and I think the most I can say is that, and I have touched on this in other appearances, is there will very likely be kind of a US geek. It will be more military focused, and I do think that Hydrograph is going to be a very large focus. And I don't think I can really say more than that.
Well, that's amazing. I'm planning on going and visiting the Geek. I'm actually so excited. I talked to you the other day about going to visit the Geek in Manchester because I do have a trip planned anyway for end of August, but I was wondering about maybe fast tracking that. I don't know if I even really need to, other than I'm just curious, and I know it'll just reinforce my feeling about buying more shares.
Mm-hmm.
But what you have sort of indicated is if I went and talked to the people at the Geek, they're going to say that your material's the best. That's what.
Yes, they are very unbiased. They don't like to, I would say, strongly prioritize one company over another because there are many graphene companies there. But if you just ask them, face value, are we performing well? Have we outperformed other companies? They should tell you the truth. And I would encourage, anyone, they are a available resource if anyone wants to do due diligence on Hydrograph. They are a great place to go. I would also say the Graphene Council can speak to, our data, our process, again, as a verification. And there's always an open invite. People are welcome to tour the Geek. Of course, we can't show everything, but it is a great experience. You can learn a lot really on how the different processing conditions happen for different applications. So anyone that enjoys, those technical discussions, it is a, I would say, well worth trip.
And I look at you joining the Geek, or your decision to join that Geek, which maybe just tell us the acronym again. It's Graphene
Engineering Innovation Center. It's a mouthful.
Okay. And this is in Manchester. Is it really like it's part of the Manchester University?
Yes, they call it the Catapult model in the UK. So it's basically affiliated with the university where we can use a lot of their resources. So if there's a piece of equipment that the Geek doesn't have, we can kind of walk across the street and use it at the university. Okay. But it is very, very focused on industry. So it moves much faster than academics typically operate. And again, there's a huge amount of customer interaction. So often when I go to the Geek, I was there last week, you see customers that we've been speaking to in the halls. So there's a large automotive company we've been working with, and I kind of passed by their senior leadership just walking in between the labs. So it is a really, really great ecosystem. And again, the customer interaction is really what drew us in.
So I've seen on the Geek site, Honda R&D is at the Geek. They say that on their website.
There are a few auto companies at the Geek.
Okay, so there's a few. There's more. No one's really disclosing all the different companies out there. And then there's some of the largest carbon fiber manufacturers in the world. Mm-hmm. How do you say there's one that starts with a V that I saw that you've disclosed? I think that you're involved with.
That we've disclosed with a V?
No. Yes.
I think what we've disclosed.
I think wasn't it a big car? David, do you remember that one? Isn't it like called? I'm thinking like Wolf or something weird like that.
Wolfpack. That's a supercapacitor company.
Oh, supercapacitor. Okay. So you've disclosed that you're involved with, how do you say it, Wolfpack with a V?
Wolf.
Isn't it a V?
I think it might be some funny spelling like that. I just say Wolfpack.
And it's a superconductor. Sorry, what is it again?
Supercapacitor. It is a smaller company, but what is great about it, they have done a lot of testing with our graphene and they have made everything public. So that has been a huge catalyst for us with other energy storage companies.
Well, what are some of the larger companies that you've disclosed that the ones that you've talked about? I've seen interviews where you've talked about some of the big companies might want thousands of tons per year.
Mm-hmm. That is mostly going to be with plastics companies and then again defense. And I would say, I have been talking more about, for example, polypropylene is a big one, PET is a big one. Overwhelmingly, it's moving to defense. So this could even be like a nylon PA6 fiber, even a PEEK. Overwhelmingly, that's where we see the interest.
So one of my goals here is bringing information to shareholders, not just for new shareholders, but existing shareholders, because I'm concerned that I was able to buy 5% of the company pretty quickly, in a matter of weeks. It did take weeks, and I had to be aggressive. I'm concerned that there's shareholders out there that don't, as much as they believe in the company and they see the upside, they obviously don't see it. There's some that didn't see as much upside as I do because I bought shares from them, or they just needed the cash. But either way, I think it's very important that the company tries to protect itself by having shareholders that aren't willing to potentially sell out to a cash takeover bid, which I'm concerned about coming. It's funny, like in Jay Taylor's interview, they quickly went to sort of a $3 a share, a sort of a layup 10-bagger opinion on the company, and saying it could be taken out at that valuation and it would be a disappointment to them, and I feel the same way. When you're out with all these companies that you're starting to work with and test and you sign NDAs, do you sign like a non-compete, non-takeover type agreement with them so they can't come and bid for you?
Not specifically a non-takeover, but I should really consider that language.
Okay, I got one more big question here. I guess we'll run down. Let's just run down in the defense industry. And so we've got robots are going to be a huge thing going forward. We've got drones, we've got body armor, we've got bulletproof glass, we've got the frames of vehicles, we've got special coatings. I've seen things that you can use graphene and you put a coating on a plane or on a drone and you can make it disappear by lighting up, create like a microwave field around, especially around an unmanned drone or like a drone plane or these different technologies. You can make it disappear on radar. What do you think the biggest volume will be in the defense industry as a potential go-to off the start for your product?
That's a good question. Right now, it feels like engineering fibers, and that mostly is likely going to be like a nylon or, for example, an aramid fiber. That would be like a Kevlar vest or ballistic protection material. We see a lot of interest in ballistic protection materials, and this could be everything from actual body armor to armored vehicles. It could even be used in aerospace components, but these very, very tough materials, again, they're extremely versatile. You can use it in clothing, you can, make components out of it. And that is, I think, currently where we see the most movement. But big picture, they also do work a lot with concrete. So these blast walls, obviously infrastructure projects that could be defense related, I would also see quite a lot there.
And on the coating side, how large is that market? Like, does it make, like, are you thinking that basically all military type vehicles, like planes and things like that, will you have coatings on them eventually?
Well, I think this is a good point to touch on, because in terms of volume, graphene volume, that would be less, but the value of that is much more. So we could likely see more revenue from coatings. And just to throw out a random, possibility, you could theoretically coat, let's say, a tank with a transparent layer of graphene, and you can kind of program it to have a thermal signature property that when you're looking at a distance with binoculars or thermal binoculars, you could have it cloaked and it could look like cattle, for example, and you would not be able to see the tank at all. So there's so much that's possible really with this technology, and I think we're really only scratching the surface of what we'll be able to implement. But again, I think that the value of these coatings, I would also say lubrication is huge. For example, China has 300 warships to every one that the US has, and we don't have the ability to improve our efficiency in machining out, for example, a lot of these metal parts that we require. So as basic as it sounds, if you can better have these lubricating oils and everything that goes along with that to really improve those efficiencies and also extend the life of our equipment and our parts, we have a huge advantage there.
And so I've seen with some some estimates using different sources, up to 80% reduction in friction with some of these lubricants. And that's versus what? Like a standard synthetic oil that we would put in our car? It gets 80% better than that?
We had that study was on using our graphene as compared to the base oil itself. So
The base oil,
there are
okay.
different synthetic oils. I would say we need more testing there. We've kind of put that on hold just because with lubricants you require so much testing really to bring something to
Yeah.
market. We will come back to that either with the right partner or perhaps even with the military.
I've been an investor in molybdenum over the decades and followed that market. And a lot of times molybdenum goes into different oils and lubricants as well. Same thing with lithium, right? I buy lithium grease all the time to, lubricate locks and things like that. So you haven't seen yet how much the improvement is over a lithium grease or a molybdenum grease yet?
No, we need more testing there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the drone market is particularly interesting. I don't know the weight and the volume, but the idea of making lighter drones that are more like bulletproof.
With EMI shielding, absolutely stronger, lighter components. You can do quite a lot.
And then as far as the battery tech goes, it seems like putting graphene into a lithium battery or other batteries makes a big difference for recharge time and longevity.
Yes, we can improve both the capacity, we can improve the charge acceptance, so it charges much faster, holds a charge longer, and again, the life cycle is longer.
And on the lithium battery, you're looking at other things other than just lithium batteries?
Yes, primarily lithium ion. We are also looking at lithium air and also zinc ion. We have some data. And again, supercapacitors, which we touched on.
Yeah, I've even seen, though, I saw a recent study, a report out talking about the improvement just even in lead acid batteries, like for a typical car, like how it would be like 40% quicker charge and
47%
some extension on life.
and
Pardon?
47% improvement in
Yeah.
charge acceptance, I believe, and we did have a modest improvement in capacity, but I think that more data again is needed on that.
And just to give an idea on that, the content to get that, how much graphene would you add to this heavy lead acid battery for a car?
Very small amount, in the milligrams.
And so the cost per battery, do we have a...
Low. Off the top of my head, it's less than $1.
Wow. I mean, it just seems like in all these different applications, it's a no-brainer. And I've just been playing around, like I go on the different AI apps and I say, tell me about what you could use graphene in a car economically and what would the payback be? And it's just amazing. You just go down the list and it's like tires, the frame, the dashboard, the electronics, the batteries, the cabling, and then you can actually make bulletproof glass. I mean, how much do you need to put in glass to make it bulletproof?
I think some of these claims that people make, like with one sheet, I don't necessarily believe that. I'm sure with enough layers you can, but I don't think the glass would be as transparent as we would like.
Okay, so you don't think there's a graphene application for bulletproof glass?
I never like saying things are not possible. I'm sure it might be. I'm just concerned about the transparency.
Yeah, I guess I should let you go, even though I could keep asking questions all day. I mean, thank you very much for doing this. I think I'm going to buy some more stock.
Thank you so much for your time and so much for your continued support.
I just want to add one more thing. It's extremely important to remember that you need to do your own due diligence. I'm just talking about what I see, what I do, and how I'm investing. But it's up to you to do the work yourself and to make your own decisions. This isn't investment advice. This is just me talking about what I'm doing, and it's up to the individual. And I've said to people, don't buy more than you can afford to have go to zero. I mean, you just never know. And so, yeah, I'm taking a big bet. But yeah, if it goes to zero, fine. I don't think it's gonna. I think it's a layup 10-bagger, etc. But that's about managing risk reward. And you have to do the work. Otherwise, you're not going to have the conviction. Graphene trying to become an expert and investigating this company and others. So not just Hydrograph, but also I've done a fairly deep dive into Nano Explorer as well, which I'm an investor in. So really exciting. Thank you very much.